Hey everyone, tonight we travel to a place that shouldn't exist. Imagine a civilization sprawling across 1,000,000 square kilometers, home to millions of people. They build cities with perfectly straight roads, two-story houses with indoor plumbing, and a sanitation system that would make a Roman engineer blush. Then, after 700 years of quiet, orderly success, they just vanish. No epic final battle, no dramatic volcanic eruption, just a slow, silent fade to black, leaving behind a script we can't read and a mystery that still haunts us. You're standing in the silent ruins of one of their ghost cities. The sun beats down, the air is still, and the only sound is the dust settling on bricks that were laid 4,500 years ago. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this, and I don't mean the heat. Forget finding a decent cup of coffee. You'd be lost without a signal, desperately trying to get Google Maps to load a city grid from the Bronze Age. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I always love to see where you're all listening from, so drop your city or country and the local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey doesn't begin in a bustling city of the past, but in a quiet, forgotten corner of the present. You're standing on a vast, sun-baked plain in what is now modern-day Pakistan. The air is thick with heat and the smell of dry earth. For centuries, this landscape held its secret close. While school children learned about the grand pyramids of Egypt and the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, this entire civilization lay sleeping beneath the dirt, a ghost in the footnotes of history. It wasn't until the 1920s that archaeologists finally stumbled upon the truth and realized they were dealing with something monumental. Until then, the world knew of three great cradles of civilization: Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China. Suddenly, there was a fourth, and this newcomer was the biggest of them all. That's your first real anchor in this story. A solid, undeniable fact. The Indus Valley civilization, at its peak, was the most geographically extensive of all the great ancient urban cultures. You need to recalibrate your sense of scale. Forget a city-state or a small kingdom. You're looking at an area that stretched from the foothills of the Himalayas down to the Arabian Sea, covering most of modern Pakistan, parts of Afghanistan, and northwestern India. It was larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Picture a map of Western Europe. You could comfortably fit France, Germany, and Spain inside its borders, and still have room to spare. This wasn't a fringe settlement. It was a subcontinent-spanning society, with a population estimated at up to 5 million people. And for the longest time, we didn't even know it was here. It's like finding out there was a secret, fully functional continent hiding in the Atlantic all this time. The silence of this civilization is what's most unsettling. The Egyptians left us boastful hieroglyphs cataloging every pharaoh's ego trip. The Mesopotamians gave us the Epic of Gilgamesh, tales of gods and heroes and existential dread. From the Indus people, we have silence. Thousands of tiny, beautiful engravings on stone seals, filled with a script of elegant symbols that no one on earth can read. There are no grand tombs filled with gold, no colossal statues of all-powerful kings staring down through the ages. There are no unearthed palaces with throne rooms or great temples dedicated to vengeful gods. It's a civilization defined by its apparent humility, its practicality, and its profound, infuriating anonymity. Their rediscovery was almost a joke in itself, a dark comedy of errors. In the 1850s, long before archaeologists knew what they were dealing with, British engineers were building a railway line between the cities of Lahore and Multan. They needed ballast, crushed stone to lay the tracks on. One of the engineers, a man named William Brunton, found a nearby ruined city full of unusually well-made, hard-as-rock-fired bricks. Perfect for the job, he thought. So, for miles and miles, the railway was built upon the pulverized remains of a 4,000-year-old city named Harappa. It's the archaeological equivalent of using the Mona Lisa as a placemat. They were literally grinding up the evidence of a lost world to make the 4:15 train run on time. It's a beautifully human, short-sighted moment that perfectly captures how easily the past can be erased. Even the name is a puzzle. You'll hear it called the Indus Valley Civilization, which makes sense because its greatest cities were found along the Indus River. But then archaeologists found hundreds of settlements along another, now extinct river system, the Ghaggar Hakra, which many believe is the legendary Sarasvati River from ancient Vedic texts. So historians still argue whether it should be called the Harappan civilization, after Harappa, the first city they found, and partly destroyed. Or perhaps the Indus-Sarasvati civilization, to give that ghost river its due. The fact that we can even settle on a name for them tells you everything you need to know about the depth of this mystery. It's an academic squabble that gets to the heart of the matter. We are outsiders peering through a keyhole at a room that has been locked for 4 millennia. So let's stop peering. Let's unlock the door. Feel the air around you begin to change. The distant hum of a modern engine fades, replaced by something older. The dry, cracked earth beneath your feet seems to soften, to breathe. A haze on the horizon isn't dust from a passing truck, but smoke from thousands of cooking fires. The scent of baked bread, of livestock, and of millions of people living and breathing together begins to fill the air. The year isn't now. It's 4,500 years ago, around 2500 BCE. You're not a tourist or a historian anymore. You're just here. And up ahead, rising from the flat, fertile floodplain of the Indus River, is a city, a mountain of reddish-brown brick, impossibly vast and meticulously planned, waiting for you to take your first step inside. The city looms. It doesn't sparkle or gleam. It's a solid, functional, colossal statement of intent, built from millions upon millions of reddish-brown bricks. As you draw closer, you realize it's built on a series of man-made mounds, deliberately raising it above the surrounding floodplain, a sensible precaution when your entire existence depends on a river that is both your lifeline and a potential threat. In the local Sindhi language, the name given to these ruins thousands of years later is Mohenjo-Daro, which translates rather grimly to the Mound of the Dead. You can be fairly certain its original inhabitants didn't call it that. People generally don't name their hometown something that sounds like it came from a zombie movie poster. They probably called it something far more pleasant, like Riverbend or the Good Brick Place. But their name for it, like so much else, has been lost to the wind. What you see before you isn't one monolithic block, but 2 distinct sections. To your left, rising high on a massive artificial platform of mud brick, is a collection of large, important-looking buildings. This is what archaeologists call the citadel, a sort of acropolis that likely housed the city's public and administrative centers. To your right, sprawling out for what seems like miles, is the lower town, a vast, orderly grid of streets and residential blocks. This is where the majority of the city's estimated 40,000 to 80,000 people lived, worked, and went about their daily lives. This bipartite layout, a high citadel and a lower town, is a classic feature of Indus urbanism. It's a design you'd see repeated in their other major cities, a clear blueprint for how to build a proper metropolis. The sheer scale of the brickwork is staggering. These aren't rough, sun-dried mud bricks like you might find in many other ancient cultures. These are kiln-fired bricks, baked at high temperatures until they are durable and water-resistant. They are the building blocks of this entire civilization, and they are everywhere. The uniformity is what really gets you. They are all the same size, with their length, width, and thickness adhering to a precise 4:1 ratio. Whether you picked up a brick here in Mohenjo-Daro or one from a city 500 kilometers away, it would conform to the same standard. This wasn't a happy accident. This was the result of a deliberate society-wide system of standardization, a Bronze Age ISO 9000 certification. Can you imagine the logistics? The wood needed to fire the kilns alone would have required immense forests. Some estimates suggest that the city before you is constructed from over 50 million of these identical bricks. The person in charge of quality control must have been the most powerful, and probably the most feared individual in the entire valley. You reach the outer edge of the city. There are no monumental gates flanked by glowering statues, no intimidating carvings of victorious battles. The entrance feels more practical than ceremonial, a simple opening in the urban fabric. The air changes as you cross the threshold. Outside, it was the open scent of the river plain. Inside, it's the concentrated smell of humanity. You smell roasting grains, the sharp tang of spices you can't name, the musk of livestock, and underneath it all, the faint, damp smell of wet clay and clean water from the city's elaborate drainage system. The roar of the city hits you not as a chaotic clamor but as a steady, industrious hum. It's the sound of thousands of conversations, the rhythmic tapping of a coppersmith's hammer, the squeal of an ungreased cart axle, the shuffling of countless sandals on paved streets. You pause, taking it all in, and you're struck by the profound difference between this place and its famous contemporaries. If you were standing at the entrance to an Egyptian or Mesopotamian city, you'd be looking up at a towering temple, a ziggurat trying to scrape the sky, or a massive palace complex designed to make you feel small and insignificant before the power of the king or the gods. Here, there is nothing of the sort. The skyline is remarkably flat, dominated by the solid two-story blocks of the houses. The grandeur of Mohenjo-Daro isn't vertical, it's horizontal. Its genius lies not in monumental architecture meant to intimidate, but in civic planning designed for the collective. The city itself is the monument. It's a strangely egalitarian feel for an ancient society. It makes you wonder about the people who built it, about their priorities. It seems they were far more interested in a clean water supply for everyone than a giant golden statue for one person. A bold choice, really. This very observation is at the heart of a major puzzle for archaeologists. Who was in charge here? The incredible uniformity of the cities, the standardized bricks, the weights and measures you'll soon encounter, it all screams of central control. But the lack of palaces, royal tombs, and kingly propaganda is deeply confusing. Historians still argue whether this sophisticated urban planning was the work of a powerful centralized state, perhaps ruled by a caste of priest-kings who kept themselves out of the limelight, or if it was the organic result of a highly organized but more diffuse system of governance, perhaps run by committees of elite merchants or clan leaders who shared a common cultural blueprint. Was this perfect grid the command of a single, unseen ruler, or the collective will of a people who just really liked things to be neat and tidy? You don't know, but as you prepare to take your first steps into the streets, you can feel that the answer is hidden somewhere in the logic of the city itself. You take your first step onto a major thoroughfare, and the feeling is immediate and disorienting. This is a city that has been designed. There's no gentle, organic meandering of paths that slowly widened into roads over generations. This is the result of a plan conceived and executed with staggering precision. The street you're on is wide, easily 10 meters across and paved with hard-packed earth and terracotta gravel. It runs in a dead straight line as far as you can see, a perfect north-south axis. To your left and right, other, equally straight streets intersected at perfect 90-degree angles. This is the grid. You are standing inside one of the world's first exercises in master-planned urban living, created 2,000 years before the Romans, who are often credited with this kind of orderly layout. The Harappans, it seems, were way ahead of the curve. You start to walk. The sheer walls of the houses rise up on either side of you, creating a canyon of baked brick. Most of the buildings present a blank, windowless face to the main street, which gives the wide avenues a strangely impersonal, almost defensive feel. The design is clearly intentional. It funnels traffic, provides shade from the relentless sun, and keeps the private lives of the inhabitants separate from the public bustle of the city. As ox carts piled high with grain or cotton textiles rumble past, you understand the logic. This is an arterial road, a highway designed for commerce and transit, not for loitering. It's so logical you could probably navigate the entire city just by knowing whether you need to go north or east. It's the kind of place you couldn't get lost in even if you wanted to, which is more than I can say for most modern shopping malls. What's truly remarkable is the discipline. In many ancient cities, life spills out into the streets. People build extensions, set up workshops, and encroach on public space until the roads become a chaotic tangle. Not here. The lines are clean. The boundaries between public street and private dwelling are absolute and respected. There are no makeshift stalls or shanties leaning against the main walls. This implies a level of civic authority or social cohesion that is frankly astonishing. You can almost imagine a Bronze Age municipal inspector with a clay tablet clipboard handing out fines for unauthorized construction or improperly parked ox carts. The people who lived here didn't just build a grid. They lived by its rules for centuries. You turn off the main avenue into a narrower side lane, and the entire atmosphere shifts. This street is only a couple of meters wide, quiet and shaded. Here, you see the doorways to the houses, simple rectangular openings that lead into the hidden world of the family compounds. The sounds from the main street are muffled now, replaced by more intimate noises filtering from the courtyards within. The low murmur of conversation, the laughter of a child, the rhythmic thump-thump of someone grinding grain. This is the true genius of the grid. It separates the city's functions. The main streets are for the city's collective commercial life, while these narrow lanes are the gateways to its private, domestic soul. The planners didn't just design a street map, they designed a social experience. As you walk deeper into the residential block, you can't help but think about the minds that conceived this. The near-perfect cardinal alignment of the main streets, north-south and east-west, was no accident. It speaks of a sophisticated understanding of surveying, and perhaps even astronomy, to plot the sightlines so accurately. A quirky but persistent idea is that this alignment was not just for practical purposes. Some speculate it had a cosmological dimension, that the city's very layout was intended to mirror the order of the heavens, aligning the human world with the divine. It's a fringe thought, but an appealing one, that this incredible orderliness wasn't just about efficiency, but about creating a space of cosmic harmony on Earth. These people weren't just building a city, they were building a concept. The perfection of the grid raises a chicken and egg question that archaeologists love to debate. Historians still argue whether a city like Mohenjo-Daro was constructed in a single, massive building project, a preconceived blueprint realized all at once, or if it grew over generations according to a very strict, pre-established set of rules. The first option implies an incredible amount of centralized power and resource mobilization, like a Bronze Age version of building a new capital from scratch. The second suggests a more decentralized but incredibly powerful cultural tradition, a shared understanding of the right way to build a city that was passed down and adhered to for centuries. Looking at the seamless regularity around you, it's impossible to tell which is more impressive, the absolute authority to command it into existence, or the profound cultural discipline to maintain it for 700 years. You reach a doorway and pause, looking into the darkness beyond. The lane you're in is just one of hundreds, crisscrossing the city in a predictable, comforting pattern. You feel a sense of calm here, a feeling that everything is in its proper place. There's a profound intelligence to this city, a quiet confidence in its own design. It wasn't built to inspire awe through grandiosity, but to function beautifully for the thousands of people who called it home. And it is in those homes, beyond these simple doorways, that the next layer of the mystery awaits. You are about to step from the public grid into the private labyrinth. You duck slightly to step through the low, rectangular doorway. The immediate heat and bright glare of the lane are cut off, and you find yourself in a cool, shaded space. It's a small antechamber, not a main room. A blank wall directly in front of you forces you to turn left or right. You realize this is a deliberate design choice. No one standing in the street can see directly into the heart of the home. It's an architectural obsession with privacy, a 4,500-year-old version of not wanting the delivery guy to see the mess in your living room. It immediately tells you that the family unit, the private sphere, was fiercely protected here. You make the turn and step out into the light again, but it's a different kind of light. Softer, more contained. You are standing in a square, open-air courtyard that forms the central hub of the entire house. This is the engine room of domestic life. The sun streams down into this space, but the high walls of the surrounding structure provide shifting patterns of shade. All the ground floor rooms of the house open onto this courtyard. Their doors are the only sources of light and ventilation. There are no exterior windows. The home looks inward, not outward. You can imagine the daily rhythm of life centered here. The smoky haze of a cooking fire in one corner, the rhythmic clack of a loom in another, the chatter of family members sharing a meal on the paved floor. You look up. The brick walls continue upwards, indicating a second story. A steep, narrow staircase, its brick treads worn smooth by millennia of footfalls, leads to the upper level. Many, if not most, of the houses in Mohenjo-Daro were multi-story dwellings. The upper rooms were likely sleeping quarters, while the flat, packed earth roof would have been invaluable extra space, a place to dry crops, store goods, or even sleep outside on suffocatingly hot summer nights. It's a compact, efficient, and highly private design for urban living. Each house is its own self-contained fortress of domesticity. In a corner of the courtyard, you see something that speaks volumes about this culture's priorities: a private well. It's a perfect circle, about a meter in diameter, lined with custom-made wedge-shaped bricks that fit together in a flawless ring. The well shaft plunges deep into the earth, tapping the clean groundwater of the Indus floodplain. To have your own personal source of fresh, clean water inside your home in the Bronze Age was a level of luxury that's hard to overstate. In most other ancient civilizations, this was a privilege reserved for the absolute elite, if it existed at all. For everyone else, it meant a daily trip to a communal well or the river. Here, it was a common feature. No more queuing up, no more gossiping with the neighbors while you haul heavy jars of water. Just pure, convenient hydration on demand. But that's not even the most impressive part. You move to a small, enclosed room just off the courtyard. The floor here is different. It's paved with carefully fitted fired bricks made watertight with bitumen tar. The floor slopes gently toward one corner, where you see a small circular hole. You found the bathroom. This wasn't just a room with a bucket. This was a dedicated bathing area, designed to handle water. In some houses, archaeologists have found what look like the remains of brick commodes, suggesting they had seated toilets. Think about that for a second. A private indoor toilet in 2500 BCE. While much of the world was still figuring out basic pottery, the people of Mohenjo-Daro were creating a domestic feature that wouldn't become common in the West for another 4,000 years. A time-traveling Roman legionary, proud of his aqueducts, would have wept with envy. And the genius of it is where the water goes. The drain in the floor doesn't just spill out into the street. It connects to a small covered channel or a ceramic pipe that runs from the house underneath the laneway's pavement and into a larger covered brick sewer running down the center of the street. This neighborhood sewer, in turn, flows into one of the massive corbel-roofed main drains that run beneath the city's major avenues, carrying wastewater safely and hygienically out of the city. It's a fully integrated citywide sanitation network. It is, without exaggeration, one of the greatest engineering feats of the ancient world, and it was all dedicated to the health and comfort of the ordinary citizen. The relative uniformity of these houses is another puzzle. While they vary in the number of rooms, the basic template, courtyard, multiple stories, access to water and drainage, is consistent across the city. Historians still argue whether this architectural consistency reflects a remarkably egalitarian social structure, a large and prosperous middle class with a fairly flat distribution of wealth, or if it conceals a more stratified society whose status markers are simply invisible to us. Perhaps the rich had more finely woven textiles, more exotic trade goods, or more servants. Things that don't survive in the archaeological record. From the outside, and even from the inside, the houses suggest a society less concerned with broadcasting status and more focused on a high standard of living for all. It's a beautiful thought, but like everything else here, it remains a tantalizing question. You step back out of the quiet privacy of the home and into the shaded laneway. The logic of the city feels clearer to you now, the way it balances the public and the private, the individual and the collective. You navigate the familiar grid, crossing one of the wide north-south avenues and head towards the high mound you first saw on your arrival, the Citadel. The journey is an ascent, a gradual climb up a wide paved rampart. As you climb, the sounds of the lower town, the workshops, the markets, the dense residential blocks, begin to fade, replaced by a more open, windswept quiet. The air feels different up here, more formal. You get the distinct impression you're entering the city's nerve center, its administrative and possibly spiritual core. You reach the top of the platform and find yourself in a vast open courtyard dominated by a structure that is both beautiful and utterly perplexing. In the center of the courtyard is a perfectly symmetrical, sunken rectangular tank. This is the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro. It is, without question, the most iconic and mysterious structure this civilization left behind. You walk to its edge and look down. It measures about 12 meters long by 7 meters wide, and it's deep, dropping over 2 meters from the level of the courtyard. At the north and south ends, wide staircases with brick treads, originally covered with wood, led down to the floor of the tank. It is an invitation to descend, to immerse yourself. The craftsmanship is breathtaking. The floor and inner walls are constructed from impeccably fitted baked bricks, laid on edge to create a strong, smooth surface. But the real genius lies in the waterproofing. The builders sealed the entire structure with a thick layer of bitumen, or natural tar sandwiched between layers of brick and mortar. This meticulous sealing made the massive basin completely watertight, a feat of hydraulic engineering that is simply astonishing for its time. This wasn't some leaky pond. It was a perfectly sealed container, designed to hold thousands of liters of water without losing a single drop. It may well be the world's first waterproof structure of this scale. You get the feeling these people could have built the world's first luxury swimming pool if they'd wanted to, complete with a tiki bar. Though you notice a distinct lack of a diving board. Surrounding the bath is a wide, paved walkway, which was likely once a colonnaded portico supported by wooden pillars. Beyond this walkway is a series of smaller rooms. You investigate them. One room contains a large, double-lined well, clearly the water source used to fill the tank. Another set of rooms to the north is a series of 8 small chambers arranged in 2 rows, each with its own bathing pavement and drain. Were these private changing rooms, or the quarters for a group of dedicated attendants or priests? At the southwest corner of the entire complex, you find a large corbelled drain, an impressive piece of engineering in itself, designed to allow the entire tank to be emptied for cleaning. Everything about this structure speaks of careful planning, immense skill, and a profound importance. But what was it for? The most widely accepted theory is that the Great Bath was a site for ritual purification. Water is a central element in many past and present South Asian religions, most notably Hinduism, where ritual bathing in sacred rivers or temple tanks is a vital practice for spiritual cleansing. Many scholars see the Great Bath as a direct ancestor of this tradition. You can easily imagine it. The tank filled with cool, clean water reflecting the sky. Priests, or perhaps the city's elite, slowly descending the steps, chanting, performing sacred ablutions in a collective ceremony. It wouldn't have been a public pool for recreation, but a sacred space for connecting with the divine. A baptismal font for an entire city. Of course, that powerful image is still just an educated guess. This leads to a central scholarly debate that has never been resolved. Historians still argue whether the Great Bath was the hub of a state religion, a place for grand public ceremonies involving large segments of the population, or if it was a far more exclusive sanctuary, reserved for a small class of priest-kings or administrators who ruled the city from the citadel. Was this the equivalent of St. Peter's Basilica, open to the masses on holy days? Or was it more like a private chapel in the Vatican, accessible only to the highest echelons? Adjacent to the bath is a large, stately building with multiple rooms and courtyards that early archaeologists whimsically nicknamed the Collegiate Building, or the College of Priests. There is zero evidence it was a college. It could have just as easily been a warehouse or an administrative block, but the name has stuck, fueling the popular image of a class of learned men in flowing robes, emerging to lead ceremonies at the Great Bath. It's a compelling story, but one built on very little hard evidence. You stand at the edge, looking into the empty, sun-bleached basin. You try to strip away the silence of the ruin and imagine the space alive. The sharp smell of the bitumen sealant, the cool touch of the water, the echo of voices across the courtyard. Was this a place of solemn, silent ritual or of joyous communal celebration? Was the water meant to purify the soul, heal the body, or simply wash away the dust of the day? The structure gives you the how in exquisite detail, but it remains stubbornly silent on the why. You are left alone with the monumental evidence and the profound absence of its meaning. You turn your attention from the grand, enigmatic purpose of the Great Bath to the practical genius of its plumbing. You follow the path of the large corbelled drain that allowed the entire tank to be emptied. It's a magnificent piece of brickwork, a vaulted tunnel disappearing into the foundations of the citadel. And as you trace its path, you have a moment of profound realization. The same intelligence, the same meticulous care that went into this monumental structure was applied to every street and alley in the city sprawling below you. The Great Bath isn't an anomaly. It's just the most dramatic expression of a citywide obsession with water and cleanliness. You've seen the end point in a private home's bathroom. Now you comprehend the sheer scale of the network that connected it all. You head back down into the lower town, but this time you're looking at it with new eyes. You're not just seeing streets and houses. You're seeing a complex living organism with a hidden circulatory system running just beneath its skin. You stop in one of the residential lanes and listen. If you concentrate, you can almost hear it. The faint subterranean gurgle of water flowing through the covered channels beneath your feet. Nearly every single house, from the largest multi-room complex to the more modest dwellings, was connected to this system. We're not talking about a few elite homes. We're talking about a near-universal public utility, a Bronze Age municipal water grid. You crouch down and examine the street itself. In the center of the lane is a line of flat, tightly fitted bricks. These are the cover slabs for the secondary drain. They could be lifted, allowing access for cleaning and maintenance. The drain itself is a channel, about 50 centimeters deep, lined with the same perfect standardized bricks you've seen everywhere else. It runs down the length of the street, collecting the wastewater from the pipes and channels that lead out of each individual house. The entire system is gravity-fed, with a gentle, carefully calculated slope that keeps the water moving, preventing stagnation. This is where their mastery of surveying paid off not just in straight streets, but in a sanitation system that actually worked. The truly brilliant part is how they kept it from clogging. At regular intervals along the drains, the Harappan engineers built small brick-lined sump pits or sediment traps. The wastewater would flow into the pit, and any solid materials would settle at the bottom. The clearer water would then flow out through an opening higher up on the opposite side and continue on its journey. All a municipal worker had to do was periodically lift the cover, scoop out the accumulated solids from the pit, and take them away, presumably to be used as fertilizer. It's a simple, elegant, and incredibly effective design. It also means that someone had the job of being the official city sump cleaner. Forget the mysterious priest king. The real unsung hero of Mohenjo-Daro was the guy with the bucket who kept the whole system flowing. It was probably the worst job in the city, but also one of the most important. This sanitation grid would have made Mohenjo-Daro a startlingly clean and healthy place to live compared to almost any other city in the ancient or even medieval world. Think of the filth and squalor of a place like medieval London, where waste was simply tossed into the street. Here, it was whisked away underground. This would have dramatically reduced the presence of pests and the prevalence of deadly waterborne diseases like cholera and typhoid. This wasn't just about convenience. It was a massive 4,500-year-old public health initiative. It reflects a deep cultural understanding of the link between sanitation and well-being. The system's thoroughness is almost comical. In some of the larger two-story houses, archaeologists have found evidence of terracotta pipes or brick-lined chutes running down through the walls from the upper floors to connect with the drains below. This means that even the second story was integrated into the sanitation grid. It's a small detail, but it's incredible. It suggests they had facilities for washing or waste disposal upstairs, a level of planning that is just so far beyond what you'd expect. They truly thought of everything. But an infrastructure this sophisticated requires constant upkeep. A single blocked channel could cause waste to back up into people's homes, creating a health hazard. So, who was in charge of maintenance? Historians still argue whether a formal, state-level body of municipal workers, a Bronze Age Department of Public Works, was responsible for cleaning the sump pits and repairing the drains, or if this was a duty handled at the community level, with each neighborhood block responsible for its own section of the grid. Was it a top-down, taxpayer-funded service or a bottom-up collective responsibility? We don't know, but the fact that the system functioned for centuries implies that whatever method they used, it worked exceptionally well. From the grand ritual statements of the Great Bath to the humble drain in a family bathroom, you see a consistent theme. These were a people who revered and respected water. They engineered their entire world to live with it cleanly and efficiently. This profound focus on water, sanitation, and purity might be one of the most powerful clues we have to their entire worldview. A worldview where order and cleanliness were not just civic virtues, but perhaps sacred duties. You wander away from the main residential blocks and into a different part of the city. The air here is dustier, filled with a chorus of new sounds. The steady rhythmic tapping of metal on stone, the grating sound of abrasion, and the low roar of kilns. The smells are different too. The sharp scent of hot stone, the acrid smoke from the fires. You found the industrial quarter, the workshops where the city's artisans transform raw materials into objects of beauty and commerce. Here, you will see the quiet, focused magic that powered this civilization's vast trade network. You step into the shaded doorway of one such workshop. Your eyes adjust to the dim light and you see several figures hunched over low workbenches. The floor is littered with reddish stone flakes and fine dust. This is a beadmaker's shop, and they are working with carnelian, a beautiful, translucent, semi-precious stone that ranges from pale orange to a deep blood red. The long, barrel-shaped carnelian beads made here were the signature luxury good of the Indus Valley. They were highly prized and have been found thousands of kilometers away in the royal tombs of Mesopotamia, a testament to their value and the incredible reach of Harappan trade. You watch one artisan at work, and you realize this is a process of incredible patience and skill. He starts with a lump of raw carnelian. First, he places it in a small kiln, heating it for hours. This thermal treatment is a crucial step, transforming the stone's color from a mottled orange to the uniform, deep red that was so highly desired. After the stone cools, he takes a small hammer and chisel and, with a series of precise sharp taps, begins to chip away at the nodule, a process called knapping. He's not just smashing it, he's expertly flaking off pieces to create a rough rectangular blank, the general shape of the final bead. Then comes the most astonishing part, the drilling. He places the bead blank into a vise and picks up a long, slender drill. The tip of the drill isn't metal. It's a tiny, razor-sharp flake of a harder stone, likely chert. With a bowstring wrapped around the drill shaft, he begins to saw back and forth, spinning the drill at high speed. A tiny plume of red dust rises as the drill slowly, painstakingly, begins to bore a hole through the length of the hard stone. Some of these beads are over 10 centimeters long. Drilling a straight, even hole through them without shattering the stone would have taken hours, possibly days, of continuous, focused effort. It's a feat of microengineering that required a surgeon's steady hand. This is the Bronze Age equivalent of building a ship in a bottle, an act of pure meditative focus. In another corner of the city, you find a different kind of workshop, quieter and even more focused. Here, artisans are creating the most iconic and most frustrating artifacts of their culture, the square steatite seals. You watch a craftsman take a small 1-inch square of soft soapstone known as steatite. With a fine-tipped bronze or copper tool, he begins to carve. But he's not just scratching a picture. He is meticulously engraving a scene in reverse so that it will create a positive image when pressed into clay. His hands are impossibly steady. You can almost imagine him complaining about having too much of whatever passed for coffee that morning. He carves with breathtaking detail. First, the image of an animal. In this case, it's the most common motif of all, a creature that looks for all the world like a unicorn. It's not a horse, but a powerful bull-like animal shown in perfect profile, its two horns overlapping to appear as one. This so-called unicorn appears on more than half of all the seals ever found, a creature of immense symbolic importance whose meaning is now a complete mystery. It might as well be the corporate logo for the entire civilization. Above the animal, he carves a short line of elegant, pictograph-like symbols, the undeciphered Indus script. Once the carving is complete, the soft stone seal undergoes a chemical transformation. It's coated in a slurry of alkali and then fired at a high temperature. The heat hardens the steatite dramatically, turning it from a soft, easily scratched stone into a hard, durable material. The process also bleaches the surface to a stark, beautiful white and creates a smooth, lustrous glaze. It's a sophisticated piece of pyrotechnology, transforming a humble rock into a tiny, intricate work of art. But what were they for? Each seal has a pierced boss on the back, so it could be worn on a string. The most common theory is that they were used by merchants and administrators. A merchant would tie a rope around a bale of goods, place a lump of wet clay over the knot, and then press his seal into it. When the clay dried, it created a unique tamper-proof tag that identified the owner and certified the contents. But this practical explanation may not be the whole story. Historians still argue whether these seals were purely economic tools like a modern barcode, or if they also functioned as personal amulets, markers of clan identity, or religious tokens, each animal and symbol holding a meaning we can no longer access. Were they just for business, or were they also a part of a person's soul? You look around the workshop at the trays of finished seals, each a tiny, perfect enigma, a key to a lock that no longer exists. Like the carnelian beads, these small objects were the lifeblood of the city, the tools of its trade and the carriers of its silent language. You step out of the artisan's workshop, your mind buzzing with the intricate details of bead drilling and seal carving. Back in the ordered street, you look at the city with a growing sense of cognitive dissonance. On one hand, you see evidence of a powerful coordinating authority everywhere you look. The perfect grid of the streets, the standardized ratio of the bricks, the integrated citywide sanitation system, the uniform weights you'll soon encounter, the consistent script on the seals. It all screams of a society that is highly organized, centrally planned, and managed with incredible efficiency. This level of coordination doesn't happen by accident. Someone somewhere had to be in charge. So you begin to look for them. In any other great ancient civilization, finding the seat of power is easy. You just look for the biggest, fanciest building. In Mesopotamia, you'd find the sprawling palace complex of the king. In Egypt, you'd be dwarfed by the monumental temples of the god pharaohs. Power was meant to be seen. It was broadcast through monumental architecture and intimidating art, designed to leave the common person in no doubt about who was running the show. Here in Mohenjo-Daro, you look for the palace, the grand temple, the throne room, and you find nothing. There are some larger houses, particularly on the citadel, that were clearly the residences of the elite. But even the biggest is just a scaled-up version of the standard courtyard house. There is no single building that dominates the landscape, no structure that unequivocally announces itself as the home of a king. You think about their burials. So much of what we know about rulers in other cultures comes from their lavish tombs. The golden treasures of Tutankhamun, the rich grave goods in the royal cemetery of Ur. These were eternal statements of power and wealth. Yet the burials of the Indus people are astonishingly modest. Most individuals were interred in simple rectangular pits, accompanied by a few pottery vessels, maybe a handful of personal ornaments like beads or bangles. There are no pyramids, no treasure-filled vaults, no extravagant burials that set one person dramatically apart from all others. If there were kings here, they were either remarkably humble, or they were really, really good at hiding from future archaeologists. This absence of overt displays of power is one of the defining mysteries of this civilization. Their art tells the same story. There are no grand reliefs of kings smiting their enemies, no statues of rulers looking stern and godlike, no propaganda celebrating military conquests. Their artistic legacy is made up of small, intimate, and deeply personal objects. The tiny seals, terracotta figurines, and the famous statuette of the so-called priest king, which is barely 17 centimeters tall. This is a society that produced one of the most advanced urban landscapes of the ancient world, but seemingly had no interest in celebrating the individuals who led it. It's as if their motto wasn't, "The king is the state," but rather, "The state is a well-maintained municipal drain." So, who held this complex society together? One theory circles back to the citadel in the Great Bath. Perhaps power was held not by a king, but by a committee of elite priests. Their authority wouldn't have come from wealth or military force, but from religious ideology and the control of sacred rituals that were seen as essential for the prosperity of the city. In this model, the rulers were more like stewards than kings, their power displayed through the flawless execution of their civic and religious duties, not through personal aggrandizement. Another compelling theory is that power was more decentralized, held by a council of wealthy merchants and the heads of powerful trading clans. In a civilization so dependent on trade and craft production, it's logical that the economic elites would also be the political elites. The rigid standardization of bricks, weights, and measures makes perfect sense in a commercial context. It's good for business. In this scenario, the city's order wasn't imposed by a divine ruler, but agreed upon by a Bronze Age chamber of commerce that understood the value of a predictable, well-regulated system. On the citadel, near the Great Bath, are the foundations of a massive building with a complex grid of passages and ventilation ducts. Early archaeologists looking for signs of a state immediately identified it as a great granary, a central warehouse where the state would store grain collected as taxes, the very bedrock of state control. It was a neat and tidy explanation. The only problem is there's no actual proof it was a granary. No significant amounts of grain have been found there. It might have just been a large public hall or an administrative building with a raised, ventilated foundation. Its identification as a granary is a classic case of seeing what you expect to see. This leads to the biggest political question of all. Historians still argue whether the Harappan civilization was a unified, cohesive empire, ruled from a single capital, or a commonwealth of independent city-states that all shared a common culture and ideology. Was there an emperor of the Indus, or just a collection of mayors who all went to the same urban planning conferences? The sheer uniformity across 1 million square kilometers suggests a high level of integration, but the lack of a clear capital city or any evidence of military conquest makes the idea of an empire a difficult fit. You are left with a ghost of a power structure, a faceless government, a civilization that celebrated the system itself, the grid, the drain, the standard, but left its leaders in the shadows. They created a world of profound order and then, with what seems like deliberate modesty, erased their own names from the story. While the political structure of this civilization remains a frustrating blank, the engine that drove it is far more visible. You leave the enigmatic citadel and the orderly lower town behind, joining a group of merchants preparing to depart from the city's outskirts. If you can't find their kings, perhaps you can find the source of their prosperity by following the money. The scene is one of organized chaos. Dozens of two-wheeled ox carts are being loaded with goods. The sturdy, humped zebu cattle, the main beasts of burden, snort and stamp impatiently. Merchants shout instructions, checking clay tags on bales and jars, their personal seals dangling from cords around their necks. There is a palpable sense of purpose here. This is not a random journey. It is a vital artery of a continent-spanning commercial network. You fall in alongside one of the lumbering carts. The air is thick with dust and the smell of livestock. The progress is slow, ponderously slow. If you think your morning commute is bad, try traveling at the speed of a reluctant ox. But the cargo these carts carry is precious. You see large, tightly wrapped bales of a soft white material. This is cotton. The Indus Valley was the first place on Earth where cotton was domesticated, spun into thread and woven into fine textiles. The cloth they produced was a high-tech luxury good, sought after across the ancient world for its lightness and comfort in hot climates. Alongside the cotton are other treasures. You see wooden chests filled with the gleaming blood-red carnelian beads you saw being made in the workshop. There are logs of valuable timber, like teak and rosewood, harvested from forests far to the north and floated down the river. There are blocks of raw copper, ingots of lead, and combs carved from ivory. Some merchants are even transporting live animals in wooden cages, monkeys and brightly colored birds, perhaps the peacock, which was native to the subcontinent and considered a stunning exoticism in the West. This caravan is a moving sampler of the wealth of the Indus. For days you travel overland, following well-worn tracks that connect the great cities of the valley. At night, the caravan circles its carts. The merchants gather around small fires, their faces illuminated by the flickering light as they share food and stories. Above, the sky is a brilliant, unpolluted tapestry of stars, the same stars that guided these traders from one settlement to the next. Eventually, the flat alluvial plains give way to a different landscape. You smell salt in the air. The caravan has reached the coast of the Arabian Sea. Here, at a bustling, purpose-built port city, the goods are unloaded from the ox carts and transferred onto the decks of sturdy, seaworthy ships. These are not simple river barges. They are ocean-going vessels with high prows, a single square sail, and a crew of experienced sailors who know the treacherous currents and seasonal monsoon winds. The Indus sailors don't need to hug the coastline. They are skilled enough to sail directly across the open ocean, a journey of hundreds of kilometers, likely island hopping through the Persian Gulf towards their ultimate destination, Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. This is where the story, which has been based on your own observation, gets a powerful confirmation from another culture. Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets, the world's first historical documents, speak of a distant, wealthy land they called Meluha. Historians still argue whether Meluha was definitively the Indus Valley, but the evidence is overwhelming. The texts list the very same goods you saw being loaded onto the ships, carnelian, ivory, timber, copper, and exotic birds, as imports from Meluha. This was no casual occasional contact. It was an established long-term trading relationship. Archaeologists in Mesopotamia have unearthed dozens of Indus-style seals, carnelian beads, and characteristic pottery. The most fascinating piece of evidence is a cuneiform text that mentions a man living in the region of Akkad who was a Meluhan interpreter. Imagine that. The trade was so regular and so important that there was a need for professional translators, people who were bilingual in Akkadian and the lost language of the Indus. It's a stunning, personal detail that cuts through the millennia. A man whose entire job was to bridge the gap between these two great civilizations, probably spending his days explaining to a Sumerian merchant that, no, the unicorn on the seal is not for sale. It's just the logo. What did the Indus merchants bring back in return? Surprisingly little, it seems. Archaeologists have found very few Mesopotamian artifacts in Indus cities. They likely imported raw materials they lacked, such as tin to mix with their copper to make bronze, as well as silver and gold. But it seems they were largely self-sufficient. This suggests that for centuries the Indus Valley ran a massive trade surplus with Mesopotamia. They had a killer export strategy, selling their high-value finished goods for the raw materials they needed. As you watch the ship set sail, its square sail filling with the sea breeze, you understand. The secret to this civilization's organization may not lie in a king or a priest, but in this. Trade was their organizing principle. The need for standardized weights to ensure fair deals. The need for seals to mark ownership. The need for great planned cities to act as hubs for production and transport. It all serves the logic of commerce. This wasn't an empire built on conquest, but an empire built on the back of an ox cart and the deck of a sailing ship. The ship of trade sails out of sight, a vessel on a sea of hypotheticals. To find something more concrete, you return to the heart of the city, to a bustling, open-air marketplace. Here, the grand, abstract concept of a trade network resolves into the fine-grained detail of 1,000 daily transactions. Farmers from the surrounding countryside display baskets of wheat, barley, and dates. Potters have laid out rows of their simple, elegant red and black ware. A coppersmith shows off gleaming fish hooks and axe heads, and as you watch these exchanges, you notice the one tool that underpins the trust and fairness of this entire economy. You focus on a merchant buying a sack of sesame seeds. He doesn't guess the weight. He doesn't haggle endlessly based on volume. Instead, he produces a simple but elegant balance scale, made of bronze or copper and a small leather bag. From the bag, he carefully selects a series of small, polished stone cubes. He places a larger cube on one side of the scale and pours seeds onto the other until the beam is perfectly level. The deal is done. There is no argument, no dispute. The authority of the stone cubes is absolute. You get a closer look at these weights. They are, in their own way, perfect works of art. They are cubes of hard, beautifully banded chert, a type of quartz, which have been painstakingly cut and polished to a flawless finish. There are no markings on them, no numbers, no decorations. They are minimalist, functional, and utterly confident in their own precision, and they are everywhere. Archaeologists have found thousands of these standardized weights at nearly every Indus site, from the largest cities to the smallest rural villages. A merchant in Mohenjo-Daro and a farmer in a tiny outpost 800 kilometers away were using the exact same system. And what a system it was! These aren't just random chunks of rock. They are components of a brilliantly logical, unified system of measurement. The smaller weights follow a binary progression, doubling in size: 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, up to 64. This is ideal for small, precise measurements. A modern computer programmer would shed a tear of joy. Then for larger wholesale quantities, the system seamlessly shifts to a decimal base, going up in multiples of that 16th unit. The base unit of 1 corresponds to about 13.6 grams in our modern system, and the accuracy of the weights across the entire civilization is astonishingly consistent. It's the kind of standardization that national governments struggle to achieve today, and the Harappans maintained it for centuries without computers or centralized factories. This system was the silent, trusted third party in every transaction. It fostered a level of commercial faith across a vast territory that was unprecedented. You couldn't cheat the system. A pound of wheat in the capital was a pound of wheat in the provinces. This kind of certainty streamlines an economy, removing friction and encouraging long-distance trade. It's a dream for anyone who values order and predictability, and a complete nightmare for anyone who loves the thrill of a good haggle. The Harappan marketplace was clearly a haggle-free zone. The cube has spoken. Their obsession with precise measurement didn't end with weight. Archaeologists have found measuring rods, or rulers, made from shell, bronze, and terracotta. A famous example, an ivory scale found at the port city of Lothal, is calibrated with divisions so small and precise, about 1.7 millimeters, that it rivals modern drafting instruments. This precision in length explains the uniformity of the bricks and the perfect right angles of the streets. They weren't just eyeballing it. They were building their world to a set of exact, repeatable specifications. Where did this precise system originate? One intriguing possibility connects their advanced mathematics back to the natural world. The base weight unit of 13.6 grams is quite close to the traditional weight standard in later India, which was based on a certain number of seeds from the vibrant red and black gunja plant. It's a quirky but plausible idea that their original master weight standard may have been something organic and reproducible, like 128 gunja seeds, which they then translated into the eternal, unchanging form of polished stone. This beautifully regulated system, however, brings us back to the great political mystery. Historians still argue whether the primary driver for this system was the need for fair and efficient trade among merchants, or the need for a powerful state to accurately assess and collect taxes from its subjects. Was this a tool of a free market, developed from the bottom up to build trust? Or was it a tool of state control, imposed from the top down to ensure the emperor got his due? The weights themselves are silent on the matter. They serve the taxman and the trader with equal impartiality. You pick up one of the chert cubes. It fits satisfyingly in the palm of your hand, cool, smooth, and dense. It feels impossibly modern. This little block of stone is a perfect microcosm of the Harappan mind, logical, orderly, and pragmatic. It is an idea, the idea of a shared, objective truth, made manifest. In this small, unassuming cube, you hold the very foundation of their entire economic world. You hold the cool, dense weight of the chert cube in your hand, a symbol of order and human ingenuity. But to understand the true source of this civilization's wealth, you must look beyond the city walls. You walk out of Mohenjo-Daro, leaving the baked brick and the shaded lanes behind, and step into a different world. You are standing on the vast, flat floodplain of the Indus River. The scale of it is immense, a horizon-spanning landscape of fertile green stretching out to meet a hazy blue sky. This is the engine room. The marketplace in the city is just where the profits are counted. The wealth itself is generated right here, in the rich, dark earth beneath your feet. You walk towards the river, passing through a patchwork of vibrant fields. The air smells of wet soil, growing plants, and the fresh mineral scent of the river itself. You see farmers tending to their crops. The staples of their civilization are wheat and barley, planted in abundance and forming the carbohydrate foundation of their diet. But you also see fields of lentils and peas, groves of date palms, and of course the leafy green shrubs of the cotton plant, whose fibers fueled their international trade. This incredible agricultural productivity is the reason tens of thousands of people could live together in cities, freed from the need to produce their own food. But this land isn't fertile by accident. It is a gift, delivered annually by the river. The agriculture of the Indus Valley did not rely on complex large-scale irrigation canals like those of Mesopotamia. Their system was simpler and far more elegant. They practiced inundation agriculture. Every year, in the late summer, the mighty Indus River, swollen with the snowmelt from the distant Himalayas, would burst its banks and flood this entire plain. It was a gentle, predictable flood, not a destructive torrent. For weeks, the land would be a shallow lake. Then, as the waters slowly receded, they would leave behind a thick, nutrient-rich layer of silt. This annual delivery of fresh, fertile topsoil renewed the land, ensuring bountiful harvests year after year. The river was the world's most efficient and free fertilizer delivery service. No subscription required, and the delivery was always on time. But the Indus was not the only pillar holding up this world. If you were to travel several hundred kilometers to the east, you would have found another, equally magnificent river system. Today, it is a dry, empty riverbed known as the Ghaggar Hakra. But 4,500 years ago, it was a mighty perennial river, and its banks were home to hundreds upon hundreds of Indus settlements, including some of their largest cities. This ghost river presents a fascinating link to ancient literature. The Rig Veda, one of the oldest sacred texts of Hinduism, speaks reverently of a powerful, life-giving river goddess named Sarasvati. For centuries, scholars assumed the Sarasvati was a purely mythical river, but modern satellite imagery has revealed the vast dried-up paleochannel of the Ghaggar Hakra, and many now believe this was the physical reality behind the myth, the lost Sarasvati River, hidden in plain sight. The existence of these two parallel, life-giving river systems, the Indus and the Sarasvati, explains the enormous geographical spread of this civilization. They were a two-river culture, a Bronze Age power couple of hydrology. But the fate of the Sarasvati is a critical and ominous part of their story. It is now completely dry. A central, life-sustaining feature of their world simply vanished. Historians still argue whether the drying up of this great river was a sudden, cataclysmic event, perhaps caused by a massive earthquake that tectonically shifted the river's headwaters, or if it was a slow, agonizing death by 1,000 cuts, a gradual desiccation over centuries due to a changing climate. The answer is key to understanding why this civilization eventually declined. Beyond feeding the people, these rivers also connected them. They were the civilization's highways. You stand on the bank of the Indus and watch the river traffic. Broad, flat-bottomed barges, their single sails billowing in the breeze, move slowly up and down the river, carrying heavy bulk cargo that would be impractical to transport by ox cart. Great logs of timber from the northern forests, huge consignments of grain, and tons of raw copper. Smaller, oar-powered boats zip back and forth, carrying people and goods between local settlements. The river was the fastest and most efficient way to travel, a liquid road network that tied their sprawling world together. The best part is, the road repaved itself with fresh silt every single year. You look at the slow, brown, powerful current of the river. It is the alpha and the omega of this place. Its waters fill the wells, supply the Great Bath, and flow through the subterranean drains. Its silt grows the grain that is weighed in the market and baked into bread in the courtyard homes. Its current carries the goods that give the civilization its wealth and reach. The rhythm of the Indus people's lives was the rhythm of the river's flood and retreat. To them, the river wasn't just a feature in the landscape, it was the landscape. It was their creator, their sustainer, and ultimately, a harbinger of their fate. You stand on the banks of the mighty Indus, a river that has been the civilization's lifeblood. But rivers, like wealth, attract trouble. A civilization this prosperous, controlling the fertile plains and lucrative trade routes, should have been a tempting target for rivals, raiders, and internal challengers. In the brutal calculus of the Bronze Age, wealth necessitates warfare. So you return to the city of Mohenjo-Daro with a new question. How did these people defend themselves? You go in search of their forts, their weapons, and their warriors, and once again, you find a quiet, confounding puzzle. Your first stop is the city's perimeter. You look for the massive, crenellated battlements, the heavily fortified gatehouses, the intimidating watchtowers that you would expect from a major ancient capital. And there are walls, certainly. Mohenjo-Daro is surrounded by a substantial barrier of baked brick, as are other major Indus cities. At first glance, this seems like clear evidence of defense. But as you examine them more closely, you begin to have doubts. The walls are thick, but they aren't astronomically high. The gateways are large and seem designed more to manage traffic than to repel a determined siege. There are no narrow killing zones, no bastions for archers, none of the classic features of aggressive military architecture. This has led many archaeologists to propose that the walls weren't primarily for military defense at all. Given the city's location on a floodplain, their most important function may have been as massive flood barriers, protecting the meticulously planned city from the one enemy they couldn't negotiate with: the river itself. Another theory is that the walls were about economic control, not military control. By channeling all traffic through a few large gates, the city's administrators could easily monitor the flow of goods and levy taxes or tariffs. The walls, in this view, were less of a fortress and more of a combination dam and customs office. They were a velvet rope to manage the queue, not a barricade to stop an army. Okay, so maybe the defenses were subtle. What about the army itself? You search for the tools of the trade. Weapons. You find some. There are elegantly shaped copper and bronze spearheads and arrowheads. There are flat, functional axes. But the overall arsenal is underwhelming. The weapons are relatively few in number, and they lack the specialization and deadliness you see in contemporary Egypt or Mesopotamia. You find no swords, the dedicated weapon of the professional soldier. You find no evidence of helmets, shields, or body armor. The weapons that do exist look perfectly adequate for hunting game or for a local police force to handle civic disturbances, but they hardly seem like the state-of-the-art military hardware of a great power. Even more telling is the complete absence of military glorification. There is no art depicting warfare, no scenes of triumphant Indus warriors marching over their defeated enemies, no carvings of the priest-king holding a bow. War, conquest, and military prowess, subjects that ancient kings from Sargon of Akkad to Rameses the Great were obsessed with, are completely absent from the Harappan artistic record. It seems they were either incredibly peaceful or just pathologically modest about their victories. Perhaps their main battle strategy was to bore their enemies into submission with a lengthy presentation on the merits of a 4-to-1 brick ratio. Among the few items that could be considered dedicated weaponry are large caches of baked clay balls, all of a similar size and weight. These are almost certainly projectiles for slings. A sling is a simple but effective weapon, capable of delivering a powerful projectile over a long distance. It's a classic defensive weapon, perfect for a citizen militia on a city wall trying to drive off bandits or opportunistic raiders. But it is not the weapon of a professional offensive army of conquest. The sling bullets, in their simple, low-tech abundance, seem to confirm the overall picture. A society equipped for defense and local policing, but not for large-scale institutionalized warfare. So were they a truly peaceful society? It feels almost too good to be true. Historians still argue whether the stunning lack of military evidence reflects a genuinely non-violent culture that had somehow transcended the need for war, or if we are simply failing to recognize their form of conflict. Perhaps their power was so hegemonic, their economic and cultural influence so complete, that for centuries no one in their region posed a credible threat. This would be a Pax Harapana, a peace maintained by overwhelming strength, not by pacificism. Or perhaps their conflicts were resolved through other means we can't see, through ritual or economic pressure. You look across the orderly, peaceful city, a place of clean water, prosperous trade, and no visible signs of the violence that plagued so much of the ancient world. A complex urban society that flourished for over 700 years without glorifying war or warriors is a profound anomaly in human history. It challenges the cynical assumption that civilization is always built on the bones of the conquered. It's a utopian vision that feels impossibly modern, and you can't help but wonder if their unique, faceless social structure was somehow the key. Perhaps a society without kings is also a society without the royal egos that so often lead to war. This civilization of peaceful traders and meticulous plumbers is a paradox. It's a society of immense order with no visible rulers, of great wealth with no signs of war. Faced with these quiet contradictions, you turn to the most abundant and articulate clues they left behind, hoping for an answer. You are in a quiet space, away from the hum of the city, with a collection of their most famous artifacts laid out before you. The steatite seals. You pick one up. It's cool and smooth in your hand, a perfect square about an inch across. It feels substantial, important. Thousands of these have been found, and each one is a tiny, concentrated package of information, a message from the past waiting to be decoded. Your eyes trace the elegant, intricate carving on its face. The seals almost always feature two elements: a central image, usually of an animal, and a short line of symbols floating above it, the Indus script. You begin with the animals, a veritable menagerie carved in miniature. The most common animal, by a huge margin, is the one that has become the symbol of the entire civilization, the so-called unicorn. It appears on well over half of all known seals. It's a powerful, muscular creature, like a wild ox or a bull, but shown in strict profile with a single long, ridged horn jutting forward from its head. We call it a unicorn for convenience, but it was almost certainly a mythical beast of their own invention, or perhaps a stylized depiction of a real animal whose horns overlap. Its meaning is a complete mystery, and its ubiquity only makes that mystery deeper. Was it the emblem of the most powerful clan? A representation of a deity? Maybe it was just their equivalent of a popular sports mascot. Go, Harappa unicorns. The second most common motif is more familiar. A magnificent zebu bull with a massive hump and a heavy swinging dewlap. Unlike the mythical unicorn, this is an animal of immense real-world importance, a symbol of power and fertility. It is always depicted with incredible naturalism and respect. Often it is shown standing before a curious object that looks like a manger or a ritual altar. The sheer power emanating from this tiny carving is palpable. After the bull, the variety expands. You see seals depicting elephants, tigers, water buffaloes, and the aggressive armor-plated Indian rhinoceros. These are the megafauna of their world, powerful and dangerous creatures that must have held a deep place in their psyche. And then there are the truly strange ones. Seals with composite animals, a tiger's body with a man's face, or a creature with the heads of 3 different animals. These hint at a rich and complex mythology, a world of spirits and hybrid beings that we can only guess at. It's their entire mythological universe, condensed onto a 1-inch square of stone. In front of many of these animals, unicorn and bull included, is another persistent puzzle, a strange object that archaeologists simply call a standard. It looks a bit like a cage or a brazier, or a filter, mounted on a pole. Its purpose is completely unknown, but its repeated presence suggests it was a key piece of ritual equipment. Perhaps it held a sacred offering, or was used to prepare a ritual drink, or maybe it was just the world's first and most confusing piece of IKEA furniture. Above every animal, there is the script. This is the real prize, the key that could unlock everything. But it is a key that no one in the modern world can turn. The script consists of around 400 unique, elegant signs. Some look like pictures of objects, a fish, a jar, a person, while others are more abstract geometric shapes. It was written, we think, from right to left. The inscriptions are maddeningly short, with an average length of only 5 signs. The longest one ever found is only 26 signs long. This brevity has led some wags to call it the Bronze Age version of Twitter. They had a lot to say, but they had a strict character limit. The fundamental question is, what does the writing record? Historians still argue whether the inscriptions are personal names, official titles, clan names, declarations of ownership, or even religious incantations. When a merchant stamped a clay tag with his unicorn seal, what was he saying? Was it the equivalent of a modern signature, This bale of cotton belongs to Bob? Or was it a clan affiliation? Goods from the Unicorn clan? Or an official title, certified by Inspector Number 7? Or even a prayer, "May the gods protect this shipment"? Each possibility would paint a radically different picture of their society. A society of named individuals is different from a society of anonymous clan members. Until we can read these few tantalizing signs, we are left guessing. You hold the small white seal in your palm. The unicorn stares out with a serene, blank expression. The script above it is a perfect, elegant, unreadable sentence. The seal feels like a direct communication, a deliberate message from a person who lived and breathed 4,500 years ago. But the dictionary is lost. It is the ultimate frustration of the Indus Valley. We are not staring into a void where nothing was left. We are staring at a library of thousands of books, all locked, and the only key is written in a language we do not understand. You push the trays of seals aside. Their sheer number and impersonal nature are overwhelming. You need something more human, a face to put to this faceless civilization. And then you see it, standing alone, commanding the space around it despite its small size, is perhaps the most famous and debated piece of art ever recovered from the Indus Valley. It is a small bust carved from soft cream-colored steatite, standing just 17 centimeters tall. But its presence is monumental. This is the figure known to the world as the Priest King. You draw closer, examining the details of this powerful face. He has a short, neatly trimmed beard that is rendered as a series of incised parallel lines. His upper lip is shaved, leaving a well-groomed mustache. His hair is parted in the middle and combed back, held in place by a simple, elegant fillet or headband. In the center of the headband is a small circular ornament, and 2 ribbons from the band trail down his back. His nose is broken, a common fate for ancient statues, but it's his eyes that capture you. They are long, narrow, and only half open. The heavy lids give him an expression of deep contemplation, of serene detachment, or perhaps of supreme, unshakable authority. Originally, these eyes were likely inlaid with pieces of shell or colored stone, which would have given them a startlingly lifelike gaze. He is cloaked in a robe that is draped over his left shoulder, leaving his right shoulder and arm bare. The robe is decorated with a beautiful and highly symbolic pattern of trefoils, 3-leafed clovers, and circles. Traces of red paste found in the carvings show that this pattern was once brightly colored. Everything about this figure, the groomed beard, the formal headband, the patterned robe, screams status. This is not a portrait of a common man. This is someone important. The name Priest King is, of course, a modern invention. The British archaeologist who discovered the statue in the 1920s was struck by a certain stylistic resemblance to figures from Mesopotamia, where rulers often had both religious and secular authority. The name stuck because it perfectly encapsulates the 2 main theories about who this person was. But it's pure speculation. For all we know, this could be a statue of Gronk the merchant, who had a really good sales quarter, or Steve, the guy who designed the really efficient sump pit. Let's break down the evidence. The priest theory leans on the statue's expression. Those half-closed meditative eyes seem to gaze inward, suggesting a man concerned with spiritual matters. The formal robe could be a ceremonial vestment. The trefoil pattern itself is a powerful symbol found in many other ancient cultures, from Egypt to Crete, often in sacred or religious contexts. He looks like a man who communes with the gods. The king theory focuses on the insignia of rank. The headband is a classic symbol of royalty or high office across the ancient world. The confident, controlled posture and the meticulously groomed appearance project an aura of secular power and worldly authority. He looks like a man who gives commands. Adding another layer of interest is the robe over one shoulder style. This specific way of wearing a formal garment has an incredibly long history in South Asia. It's a style you see echoed thousands of years later in depictions of the Buddha, and is still used by monks today. This might be a hint of a deep, underlying cultural continuity, a thread of tradition that stretches all the way back to the Bronze Age. But is it even a portrait of a real person? Historians still argue whether the priest king represents a specific, individual ruler, or if it's a more generalized, idealized depiction of a ruling class or an office. In the same way that a statue of a Greek god isn't a portrait of a specific person but an embodiment of an ideal, perhaps this isn't King X, but rather a representation of the very concept of leadership in Harappan society, calm, controlled, and semi-divine. He could also be a depiction of a mythical hero or an ancestor, a revered figure from the past rather than a living ruler. You stare at the statue's calm, silent face. The half-lidded gaze gives nothing away. It is a perfect mask of authority. It is the face of the entire civilization's mystery. Organized, serene, and profoundly unreadable, it projects power, but refuses to explain the source of that power. It's the ultimate poker face, held for 4,500 years. This single, small object perfectly embodies the central question of who was in charge. Was it a priest, a king, a committee, a concept? The statue looks back at you, holding its secrets close. Its serene expression a challenge to all our modern assumptions about power, leadership, and what a civilization is supposed to look like. The serene, enigmatic face of the priest-king fades, leaving you with the tantalizing idea of a formal, state-level religion, all ceremony and solemn ritual. But religion is rarely confined to grand public stages. To find the true pulse of a people's belief, you must look inside their homes at the objects they touched and revered every day. You turn your attention from the unique, high-status statue to the thousands of humble, handmade artifacts found in the rubble of nearly every house in Mohenjo-Daro. And here, in the clutter of domestic life, you find the goddesses. They are small, female figurines, crudely shaped from terracotta clay. They are some of the most common artifacts this civilization produced. You pick one up, it's rough to the touch. The body is often just a simple pinched torso with exaggerated hips and breasts. The face is a mere suggestion, a beak-like nose on an otherwise blank visage. But all the artistic effort, all the detail, has been poured into the headdress. The figurines wear fantastically elaborate fan-shaped creations on their heads, sometimes with cup-like panniers on either side. They are adorned with necklaces and girdles, also applied as separate strips of clay. Many of them are stained with soot, particularly in the headdress cups, suggesting they were used as lamps or as altars for burning incense or oils in household rituals. These are the so-called mother goddesses. While the priest-king represents a distant, formal authority, these figures feel intimate and personal. They were likely the focus of domestic worship, household idols to whom a family would pray for fertility and protection. They are fertility with a capital F, fertility of the womb, to ensure the continuation of the family, and, by extension, the fertility of the fields and the livestock that sustained them. They are the Harappan equivalent of a saint statue on the mantelpiece, though arguably with a better hat. Their raw, handmade quality suggests they weren't the product of elite artisans, but were perhaps made by the family members who used them, a form of devotional folk art. So you have one potential pillar of their belief system, a widespread popular cult of a mother goddess, focused on the immediate concerns of hearth and home. But then you turn your gaze back to the seals, and you find a figure that suggests a much more complex and strangely familiar theology. It is Seal 420 from Mohenjo-Daro, arguably the most famous and debated single seal of them all. On it is a scene that seems to open a window directly into their mythological world. At the center sits a figure in a pose of pure, yogic discipline, heels pressed together in a lotus position. He wears a towering, intricate headdress made of two enormous, grooved water buffalo horns, with a fan-like structure in the center. He may have three faces, one looking forward and two in profile. His arms are adorned with bangles from wrist to shoulder. He is surrounded by four powerful wild animals, an elephant and a tiger to his right, a rhinoceros and a water buffalo to his left. Beneath his throne-like seat are two deer. The entire scene radiates an aura of controlled wild power. This figure has been the subject of intense scholarly excitement because of his startling resemblance to a major deity of later Hinduism, Shiva. In his incarnation as Pashupati, Shiva is the lord of all beasts. As a master yogin, he is the supreme ascetic, often depicted meditating. He is also sometimes shown with multiple faces, and is closely associated with the bull, a cousin to the water buffalo on the headdress. The parallels are so striking that many scholars are convinced this is a proto-Shiva, a 4,500-year-old ancestor of one of the most important gods in the Hindu pantheon. It's a powerful, goosebump-inducing link across millennia. Of course, this interpretation is a scholarly minefield. Historians still argue whether the figure on the seal is truly a male deity and a direct precursor to Shiva, or if it could be something else entirely. Some suggest it's a female deity, a mistress of the animals common in other ancient mythologies. Others see a shaman in a ritual horned mask, channeling animal spirits. The figure's supposed ithyphallic nature, another link to Shiva's fertility aspect, is also highly ambiguous and may just be a feature of the belt he wears. To call him Proto-Shiva is to look at the Bronze Age through a lens colored by much later beliefs, a practice that always makes historians nervous. You are left with a fascinating fragmented picture. It's like trying to assemble a 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle with only 50 of the pieces and no picture on the box lid. You have the Great Bath, suggesting a focus on water purity. You have the ubiquitous mother goddesses, pointing to a domestic fertility cult. You have reverence for certain animals, like the bull and the unicorn. You have sacred symbols, like the pipal tree, which appears on some seals and is a central sacred symbol in later Hinduism and Buddhism. And you have the powerful, enigmatic figure of the Lord of the Beasts. There's no simple, unified religion here, but a rich tapestry of symbols and practices, a deep well of belief from which later Indian traditions may well have drawn. You are surrounded by their beliefs, a ghostly collage of goddesses, sacred baths, and horned, meditative figures. Every theory about who they were and what they believed is an educated guess, a story we tell ourselves based on silent objects. But it doesn't have to be this way, because these people could write. They had a voice. And that voice is the single most frustrating mystery of all. You turn your attention back to the elegant, baffling symbols that adorn the seals, the pottery, and the tiny copper tablets. You are now face to face with the Indus script, the ultimate lockbox of this civilization. If we could read this, we might know the name of the priest king. We might know the purpose of the Great Bath. We might know what the unicorn symbolized. We might know if they were a kingdom, an empire, or a republic of merchants. All the answers are likely right here, hidden in plain sight within these graceful geometric forms. But for now, their words are just patterns, and their voice is a profound silence. Here is what we know for sure. Over 5,000 inscribed artifacts have been discovered containing around 400 unique signs. This number of signs is the crucial first clue. It's far too many for a simple alphabet like the one you're using to understand me now, which has only 26 letters. But it's also far too few for a purely pictographic system like early Chinese, which required thousands of signs, one for every single word. This places the Indus script in a category linguists call logosyllabic. It was likely a complex mix, where some signs represented whole words or concepts, a logogram, while others represented phonetic syllables, a syllabary. We also know with near certainty which way to read it. By looking at instances where symbols are cramped or overlap at the end of a line, it's clear the script was written from right to left. So you start on the right and move your eyes leftward. Easy enough. Sometimes, for a second line of text, they would reverse direction and write from left to right, a style called boustrophodon, which means as the ox turns when plowing a field. It was efficient, but it doesn't help us with the meaning. The biggest problem, as you've already seen, is the sheer brevity of the texts. Most inscriptions are only 4 or 5 signs long. Trying to decipher a lost language from these snippets is like trying to reconstruct the complete works of Shakespeare by only reading a handful of bumper stickers. You might learn a few words, but you'd have no grasp of the grammar, the poetry, or the plot. The holy grail for any would-be decipherer is a bilingual text, a Rosetta Stone. The actual Rosetta Stone was the key to Egyptian hieroglyphs because it contained the same royal decree written in 3 scripts. Hieroglyphs, a simpler Egyptian script called Demotic, and crucially ancient Greek, a language we already knew. By comparing the Greek to the hieroglyphs, the code was finally broken. No such bilingual artifact has ever been found for the Indus script. No clay tablet with a trade record written in both Indus symbols and Mesopotamian cuneiform has ever emerged from the sands, though archaeologists are still hoping. There is one spectacular exception to the rule of tiny inscriptions. At the magnificent city of Dolavira, archaeologists excavating a gateway made a stunning discovery. Lying on the floor were 10 enormous symbols, each about 37 centimeters high, crafted from brilliant white gypsum crystal. They had clearly once been inlaid into a large wooden board that would have hung above the gate. This Dolavira signboard was a public proclamation, meant to be seen from a distance by everyone entering the city. It's their one piece of monumental writing, and we have no idea what it says. Was it the name of the city? A welcome message? A warning to visitors? All unicorns must be on a leash? Your guess is as good as anyone's. This hasn't stopped people from trying to crack the code. The history of the Indus script is littered with failed decipherments, with scholars trying to link it to every known language family on Earth. At this point, someone has probably tried to prove it's the recipe for a really good lentil soup. The most significant and persistent scholarly debate, however, centers on the language family it most likely belongs to. Historians still argue whether the script records an early ancestor of the Dravidian languages, like Tamil or Telugu, spoken today mainly in southern India, an early Indo-Aryan language related to Sanskrit, or something else entirely, a lost language with no known descendants. The Dravidian hypothesis has the most circumstantial evidence supporting it, and it's the one most linguists favor. But without a successful decipherment, it remains an unproven, though compelling theory. Today, the quest has gone digital. Researchers use powerful computers to perform statistical analyses on the script, looking for patterns. They can identify the most common signs, which signs tend to start or end a text, and which signs frequently appear next to each other. This allows them to slowly map the grammar and syntax of the language, even without knowing what the words mean. It's a slow, grueling process of finding structure in the silence. You look at the 10 white signs from Dolavira, a message broadcast to the world, now received as pure, unadulterated mystery. They had a voice, but until we find the key, we remain deaf to their words. You are standing at a precipice not of space, but of time. For 7 centuries, the world you have been exploring, this civilization of quiet order, clean streets, and prosperous trade, has been running like a well-oiled machine. But machines wear out, systems break down. You feel the centuries begin to slide past, from the confident peak of 2500 BCE, down to 2400, 2300, 2200, a slow, almost imperceptible drift. Now, as the calendar in your mind settles around 1900 BCE, you look at the city of Mohenjo-Daro again. It is still a great city. It is still home to thousands of people. But the machine is starting to rattle. The first, undeniable cracks are appearing in the foundation. You walk down one of the main north-south avenues. It's still recognizable, but the clean, sharp lines are gone. A crude, poorly built wall juts out from a house, encroaching several feet into the public thoroughfare. A generation ago, this would have been unthinkable. The civic discipline that kept the streets clear for centuries has begun to fray. It's a small act of defiance, or perhaps desperation, but it is a sure sign that the central authority that once enforced the city's master plan is either weakening or has lost the will to care. The city's famously strict homeowners association, it seems, has finally disbanded. You turn into a residential block and enter one of the large, elegant courtyard houses you explored earlier. The change here is even more jarring. The spacious rooms that once housed a single, prosperous family have been carved up. Hasty, flimsy walls of used or badly fired brick have been erected, subdividing the grand space into a series of cramped, dark little cubicles. What was once a stately home has become a tenement, a warren of small apartments. This wasn't an architectural renovation. It was a response to pressure. It suggests an influx of people from the countryside crowding into the city, or a once wealthy family falling on hard times and renting out every available corner. It's the Bronze Age equivalent of the depressing studio apartment, a clear sign of social and economic stress. The magnificent infrastructure, the pride of the city, is also showing its age. You see a section of a street drain that has been repaired, but not with the customary precision. It's a shoddy patch job, and you can see signs of leakage, a dark stain spreading across the pavement. The once invisible and odorless sanitation system is beginning to fail. And what's that smell? You trace it to a new structure built in what was once an open courtyard, a pottery kiln, its chimney belching thick, acrid smoke into the residential air. In the city's prime, industrial activities like firing pottery were kept to designated zones. Now it seems people are setting up shop wherever they can. The old zoning laws are being ignored. The quality of their craft is declining. The pottery is thicker, less elegant in its decoration. The beautiful, intricate seals, with their powerful animal motifs, become rarer. The ones that are made are often smaller, with scratchy, less detailed carvings. The long, perfectly drilled carnelian beads, the signature export that once traveled all the way to Mesopotamia, have all but disappeared. This isn't just a change in fashion. It's evidence that the vast trade networks are breaking down. The flow of wealth and exotic raw materials that funded the great cities is drying up. In the upper, most recent layers of the city, a handful of skeletons are found, not in proper graves but lying in the streets and houses where they fell. Early archaeologists, with a flair for the dramatic, called this the massacre at Mohenjo-Daro and imagined a final bloody invasion. But modern analysis has shown no signs of a single violent battle. Instead, these scattered remains tell a quieter, sadder story. A story of a breakdown in civic services so complete that there was no one left to give the dead a proper burial. This is not the picture of a civilization destroyed by a single catastrophic event. It is a slow, creeping decay, a system unraveling from the inside out. Historians still argue whether this internal social breakdown was the primary cause of the civilization's eventual collapse, or if it was merely a symptom of a much larger external pressure that was beginning to exert its influence. Was the government collapsing because the people were stressed? Or were the people stressed because the government was collapsing? It's a classic chicken and egg problem, a debate about the sequence of a fatal disease. You stand in a street that feels like a shadow of its former self. It's narrower, dirtier. The air is smoky. The old sense of pride and order has been replaced by an atmosphere of expediency and making do. The city is still alive, but it's ailing. The perfection has bled out of it. And you realize with a gathering sense of dread that you are not witnessing the end of the story. You are just watching the beginning of the end. The great vanishing has begun. You stand in the smoky, crowded streets of the decaying city, surrounded by the evidence of a system in crisis. The subdivided houses, the clogged drains, the encroaching walls. These are all symptoms of a profound social illness. But what is the cause? Why is this meticulously ordered society, which ran like clockwork for 700 years, suddenly falling apart? The answer, you realize, is not within the city walls. It is not in the actions of the people. To find the real culprit, you have to look up. You have to look at the sky. For as long as anyone could remember, the rhythm of life in this part of the world had been set by the Indian summer monsoon. Every year, like a divine promise, the winds would shift, drawing moisture-laden air from the ocean. This would bring the torrential, life-giving rains to the subcontinent. While the cities on the Indus plains didn't rely on direct rainfall to water their crops, the entire river system on which they depended was a product of this monsoon. The heavy rains and snowmelt in the far-off Himalayan headwaters were what fed the Indus and the Sarasvati, guaranteeing the strong, predictable annual flood that laid down the fertile silt. A strong monsoon meant a healthy river. A healthy river meant a bountiful harvest. A bountiful harvest meant a prosperous civilization. But now, that promise is being broken. You feel it in the air. The summer heat is more oppressive, more suffocating than ever before. The sun beats down from a sky that remains a sterile, glaring blue for weeks on end. The clouds that do gather are thin and wispy, not the dark, pregnant thunderheads of the past. When the rain finally does come, it is feeble and short-lived, a brief spatter of drops on the parched, cracked earth, not the soul-quenching deluge of generations past. People have always complained about the weather, but this is different. This is a fundamental shift in the machinery of the world. What you are experiencing is the stark, on-the-ground reality of a massive climate change event. Modern science, through the painstaking analysis of ancient climate records trapped in lake sediments, ocean cores, and cave stalagmites, has confirmed it. Around 1900 BCE, the Indian summer monsoon, which had been in a strong and stable phase for millennia, began to weaken dramatically. It became erratic, unreliable. This wasn't a local drought. It was a hemispheric scale shift in atmospheric patterns. The Harappans, whose entire civilization was exquisitely adapted to a specific, predictable climate, were now facing a world with a new set of rules. The direct consequence of the failing rains is the failing of the rivers. With less water flowing down from the mountains, the great annual flood of the Indus weakens. Some years the flood is too low, failing to reach and fertilize the outlying fields. Other years it arrives late or not at all. The life-giving silt is no longer being deposited with the same dependable generosity. The river, once their greatest ally, is becoming a fickle and untrustworthy partner. This leads inevitably to agricultural collapse. The crop yields begin to fall. The massive surplus of grain that fed the cities, supported the artisans, and filled the merchant caravans begins to shrink and then to disappear. Famine, a threat held at bay for centuries, becomes a real and terrifying possibility. Now the social decay you witnessed makes perfect sense. The overcrowding in the cities is likely due to desperate farmers abandoning their unproductive fields. The breakdown in civic order and the decline in craftsmanship are the direct results of a society under immense stress, grappling with resource scarcity and hunger. They had built the most sophisticated water management system in the ancient world, a masterpiece of plumbing and engineering. But that system is useless if the water is turned off at the main. This wasn't the first time the climate had changed, but it was the first time it had changed on a civilization so complex. The Earth's climate is naturally volatile. The Harappans were simply the unfortunate inheritors of a stable period that was coming to an end. Their success was in many ways a product of that stability. They had perfected a system for a world that was, unbeknownst to them, temporary. The scientific evidence for this period of aridification is now overwhelming, but its precise impact remains a subject of intense study. Historians still argue whether this climate change was a swift, catastrophic blow that shattered the civilization in just a few generations, or if it acted as a long-term grinding stressor that slowly wore away their resilience over centuries, leaving them vulnerable to a death by 1,000 cuts. Was it a sudden heart attack or a long chronic illness? You look at the faces of the people in the street. You see the anxiety as they scan the cloudless sky. You see the hunger that is sharpening their features and their tempers. The problem is no longer a clogged drain that a municipal worker can fix. The problem is the sky itself. The very engine of their world is sputtering, and there is no one on Earth who knows how to fix it. The weakening monsoon is a slow, creeping poison, gradually sapping the strength of the Indus River and the civilization along its banks. But to witness the true heart of the catastrophe, you must travel east. You leave the stressed but still living cities of the Indus Valley behind, and move into what was once the vibrant, populous eastern heartland of their world. This was the domain of the other great river, the Sarasvati. You are searching for that mighty river, the one praised in ancient hymns, the lifeblood of hundreds of settlements. And what you find is a void. You stand on what should be a riverbank, but there is no river. Before you is a vast, dry wound in the earth, a wide, dusty depression that snakes across the landscape towards the horizon. In places, a few stagnant, reed-choked pools shimmer under the oppressive sun, but the flowing water is gone. The air is silent. There is no birdsong, no croaking of frogs, no sound of a current. The river has vanished. It has become a ghost of itself, leaving behind only the scar of its former presence. You are standing in the dead heart of a dying world. What happened here was a perfect storm of geological and climatic disaster. The Sarasvati, it turns out, was always living on borrowed time. Unlike the Indus, which has a direct, unassailable connection to the Himalayan glaciers, the Sarasvati's main sources of water were two other rivers, the Sutlej and the Yamuna. which once flowed into its channel. But millennia ago, a series of tectonic shifts, the slow, inexorable grinding of the Earth's plates, caused these two rivers to change course. The Sutlej shifted west to join the Indus, and the Yamuna carved a new path east to join the Ganges. This geological piracy starved the Sarasvati of its glacial water supply. It was a mortal wound. For a time, the strong summer monsoons were enough to keep the river flowing as a healthy, rain-fed system. But when the monsoons began to weaken, it was the final, fatal blow. The already wounded river had no reserves, no glacial lifeline to fall back on. It began to shrink, to break apart into a series of disconnected lakes and pools, and then to disappear entirely. In a cruel twist of irony, the river's very name, Sarasvati, can be translated as "she who is full of lakes," perhaps a haunting cultural memory of the river in its death throes. The human cost of this ecological collapse is staggering. For centuries, this region was a thriving hub of the Indus civilization. Now the cities and towns that line the dry riverbed are being abandoned. You walk through the silent streets of one such settlement. The wind blows dust through the empty doorways of courtyard houses. A child's terracotta toy lies half buried in a drift of sand. The town's well is just a deep, dry hole. The fields that once surrounded the town are barren. The soil turned to salty, cracked clay. The people who lived here had a simple choice: move or die. You see them on the horizon, a slow-moving line of humanity against the parched landscape. It is an exodus. Entire communities, their worldly possessions piled onto groaning ox carts, are on the move. These are the world's first climate refugees. They are thin, weary, their faces etched with the grief of abandoning the only homes their families have ever known. There is no international aid coming, no one to offer them shelter. They are simply moving, driven by thirst in search of water. Where are they going? Some trek east, pushing into the dense forests of the Gangetic Plain, a new frontier. Others head south, towards the coastal regions of Gujarat, where rainfall is more reliable, and many turn west, following the setting sun towards the Indus Valley, seeking refuge in cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. Now you understand the source of the overcrowding, the subdivided houses, the pressure on the failing infrastructure in those cities. They are being overwhelmed by a wave of internal migration, a desperate influx of people from their own collapsed heartland. The scale of this event is difficult to comprehend, and its exact timing is a matter of intense debate. Historians still argue whether the final drying of the Sarasvati was a rapid, apocalyptic event that took place over a few short decades, triggering a massive and chaotic refugee crisis, or if it was a slower, more staggered process that unfolded over a century, allowing for a more gradual and orderly relocation. But whether it was a flood or a trickle, the result was the same. The eastern half of their world had ceased to exist. You watched the last of the migrants disappear over the dusty horizon. Their abandonment of this region was not the end of their culture, but it was the end of their great urban experiment. The loss of the Sarasvati shattered the geographical and demographic core of their civilization. The delicate balance had been broken. The society that had seemed so stable, so eternal, was now fractured and adrift, a people whose world had literally crumbled to dust beneath their feet. The story so far is one of a slow, tragic decline, a world undone by a changing climate and a dying river. It's a complex, impersonal ending, and for many, it's an unsatisfying one. We are creatures of narrative, and we crave drama. We want a climax, a final battle, a clear villain. For a very long time, the story of the Indus Valley's collapse had exactly that. The culprit wasn't the climate, it was a conquest. So now you must play the part of a cold case detective, revisiting the scene of the crime to investigate this older, more violent theory. The specter of an invasion. You walk the streets of the late decaying Mohenjo-daro, but this time you're not looking for clogged drains or subdivided houses. You are looking for the signs of war, arrowheads embedded in brick walls, thick layers of ash from a city put to the torch, the hastily buried dead in a mass grave. You are looking for evidence of the event that, for decades, was taught as historical fact. The Aryan invasion. The theory, championed in the mid-20th century by the influential archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler, was as dramatic as it was simple. Around 1500 BCE, nomadic tribes of light-skinned horse-riding warriors identifying themselves as Aryans swept down from the steppes of Central Asia into the Indian subcontinent. They were, according to this theory, a vigorous, warlike people, and in the pages of their oldest sacred text, the Rig Veda, they seem to describe their conquests. The Veda speaks of their chief god, Indra, as Puramdara, the fort destroyer. It describes epic battles against a native people, the Dasa or Dasyu, who lived in fortified settlements. Wheeler, with a brilliant and theatrical leap of logic, connected these ancient poetic hymns directly to the silent ruins of the Indus Valley. The great brick cities were the forts that Indra destroyed. The sophisticated urban Harappans were the Dasyu, and as his final damning piece of evidence, Wheeler pointed to the handful of unburied skeletons found in the city's final phase. Standing over the contorted remains of a man, a woman, and a child, he famously declared, "Indra stands accused." It was a powerful, compelling narrative. It had heroes, villains, and a smoking gun. The only problem is, modern archaeology has revealed it to be almost entirely wrong. You start by re-examining that smoking gun, the so-called massacre skeletons. As you already know, there are far too few of them. Less than 40 individuals in a city that once housed 40,000. They show no clear evidence of violent death in battle. There are no sword cuts on the bones, no crushed skulls that can be definitively linked to combat. And most importantly, they don't all date to the same time. They are the sad, scattered remains of people who died over a period of many years during a time of social collapse, not the victims of a single final battle. Next, you look for the destroyed forts. You search for the evidence of a massive citywide fire, the kind that a conquering army would leave behind. And you find nothing. There is no destruction layer at Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa that corresponds to this period. The cities weren't burned to the ground. They just slowly decayed and were gradually abandoned. The final nail in the invasion theory's coffin is the timeline. It's simply all wrong. The great urban phase of the Indus civilization was over by 1800 BCE. The cities were already emptying out, their trade networks shattered, their populations scattering into smaller rural villages because of the environmental collapse you've witnessed. The migration of Indo-Aryan-speaking peoples into the subcontinent appears to have happened after this collapse, not during it. They didn't kick down the door to a thriving civilization. They wandered into a house that was already largely empty. It was less of a Viking invasion, and more like your distant cousins finally showing up and moving into your old bedroom a year after you've already left for college. The cultural evidence tells a similar story. The horse-drawn chariot is the iconic symbol of the Vedic Aryans, yet horses are almost entirely absent from Harappan art and archaeology. No proud stallions on the seals, no clay models of chariots. The two cultures had completely different technological and symbolic toolkits, so the grand, violent theory of invasion has been replaced by a much slower, more nuanced picture of migration and cultural interaction over many centuries. But the nature of that interaction is still a hot topic. Historians still argue whether the incoming Indo-Aryan groups and the remaining post-Harappan populations engaged in a significant cultural exchange, with the newcomers adopting local farming techniques and belief systems, or if the new culture largely replaced the old. How much of the Indus DNA, both genetic and cultural, survived this transition to become part of later Indian civilization? You stand in the quiet ruins, the dust settling around you. The ghosts of invading warriors have been banished by the steady, patient work of archaeology. The story of the end is not a story of a clash of armies, but a story of the clash between a civilization and its changing world. The enemy was not Indra, the fort destroyer. The enemy was a climate that had turned against them. The ghosts of the Aryan invaders have been laid to rest, banished by the cold, hard facts of archaeology. The primary culprit for the Great Vanishing appears to be the environment itself, a climate that grew hostile, a river that disappeared. But a crisis of this magnitude is never simple. A society weakened by hunger and thirst becomes vulnerable to other, more insidious enemies. You are now in the crowded, unsanitary streets of late Harappan Mohenjo-Daro, And you can feel a new threat in the air, a danger that moves silently from person to person. You are here to investigate the role of sickness. For centuries, the people of the Indus Valley had lived in a state of remarkable public health. Their brilliant sanitation system, a grid of covered drains and sewers, was a proactive defense against the waterborne diseases that ravaged so many other ancient societies. Their spacious, well-ventilated courtyard homes helped to limit the spread of airborne pathogens. They were, in essence, a civilization that had engineered its own herd immunity through civic planning. But now that great defense has been turned into a weapon against them. The system is in a state of collapse. The drains are clogged and overflowing. The once clean wells are likely contaminated by seeping wastewater. The once spacious homes are now crowded tenements, packed with malnourished families and desperate refugees from the dried-up Sarasvati basin. This is a perfect storm, a textbook recipe for an epidemic. The very infrastructure that once protected them now becomes a breeding ground for pathogens like cholera and typhoid, diseases that spread like wildfire through a contaminated water supply. It's a tragic, final irony. Their greatest strength has become their most profound vulnerability. You can almost feel the sickness in the air. The vibrant hum of the city has been replaced by a more desperate, fretful energy, punctuated by the sound of coughing from the dark, overcrowded rooms. In these conditions, crowd diseases would thrive. Tuberculosis, a chronic and debilitating lung disease, spreads easily in close quarters among people whose immune systems are compromised by poor nutrition, and there is direct, chilling evidence that they were facing these threats. Paleopathologists, the cold case detectives of archaeology, study ancient skeletons for the telltale signs of disease. And in the bones from these final, desperate centuries, they find them. They have found skeletons from Harappan cemeteries bearing the distinctive, destructive lesions of leprosy, a terrifying disease that would have rendered its victims social outcasts. A skeleton from a site in Rajasthan, dated to the dawn of the civilization's decline, is one of the oldest cases of leprosy ever found in the world. They have found skulls showing evidence of infectious diseases, while plagues that kill quickly, like cholera, leave no mark on the bone. These chronic illnesses prove that the population was suffering from a heavy disease load, and new threats could have arrived from afar. Those same trade routes that brought carnelian to Mesopotamia and silver back to the Indus could have been highways for deadly microbes. A Harappan sailor on a ship in the Persian Gulf, a merchant in a Mesopotamian city, either could have been exposed to a pathogen to which the entire Indus population had no prior exposure and therefore no natural immunity. We've seen the devastating impact of such events throughout history. A novel virus or bacterium, introduced into this stressed and weakened population, could have scythed through the cities with terrifying speed and lethality. Even in the Bronze Age, you had to be careful what you picked up on a business trip. The role of disease in the final collapse is, like everything else, a matter of debate. Historians still argue whether a massive epidemic, a Bronze Age Black Death, could have been a primary cause of the deurbanization, a decisive blow that made the cities so terrifying that people fled them en masse. Or was disease simply a tragic but secondary consequence, a final kick to a civilization that was already down? Did sickness drive the final abandonment? Or did it simply prey on the weak and the hungry who were left behind? Whatever its exact role, a widespread epidemic would have had a catastrophic psychological impact. Imagine a world where the rains have failed, the river has died, the harvests are meager, and now, an invisible enemy is striking down your family and your neighbors. It would feel truly apocalyptic. It would seem as though the world itself, from the sky above to the water below to the very air you breathe, had become hostile to human life. It would shatter the remaining social bonds, destroying the trust and cooperation needed to face the larger environmental crisis. You walk through a city that is not only starving, but sick. The carefully planned order has given way to a landscape of misery. This may not be the single cause of the vanishing, but it is a powerful accelerant. Disease is turning the great cities from centers of opportunity and innovation into inescapable death traps. The great unwinding of this civilization is now happening at the most intimate level of all, within the cells of the human body. The city is sick. The society is fractured. The sky is empty of rain. The situation has become untenable. For centuries, the entire logic of this civilization was a gravitational pull towards the great urban centers. The cities were where you found safety, opportunity, community, and clean water. They were the engines of progress. Now, that logic has inverted. The gravity has reversed. The cities have become the trap. They are centers of hunger, disease, and social decay. And so, the people begin to leave. You witness the decision being made in one of the cramped tenements that was once a fine courtyard house. A family gathers in the dim light, their faces etched with weariness. The father looks at his children, their bodies thin from malnutrition. The mother looks at the contaminated well in the courtyard, a place they now fear. There is no grand debate. There is only a quiet, resigned consensus. There is nothing for them here anymore. The city has broken its promise. It is time to go. The packing is a somber affair. There are no great treasures to crate up, no luxury goods. The wealth of the city is a distant memory. Instead, they pack for survival. A few precious tools, a bronze axe, a stone grinder for grain, a small bag of seed barley, saved from the last meager harvest, a hope for a future planting. Their everyday pottery, some warm blankets, a child's toy. They are not moving to a better life. They are retreating in the hopes of finding life at all. They load their meager possessions onto a two-wheeled ox cart, the same kind of vehicle their ancestors used to bring goods to the city. Now, it is their escape pod. This scene is being repeated in house after house, laneway after laneway across the vast, dying metropolis. It is not a panicked flight in the face of an invading army. It is a slow, heartbreaking, orderly exodus. A steady stream of families trickles out of the city gates, turning their backs on the baked brick walls that had protected their ancestors for 700 years. The great deurbanization has begun. The city is hemorrhaging its people, its lifeblood draining away into the parched countryside. So where are they going? They are not migrating to another great city. They are moving away from the very idea of the city. The great urban experiment, with its dependence on a massive agricultural surplus and complex trade networks, has failed. The response is a strategic retreat to a simpler, more resilient way of life. This is the great demographic shift that defines the late Harappan period, a mass movement of people away from the huge urban centers and into thousands of smaller, dispersed agricultural villages. They are becoming rural again. They follow the remnants of the rivers or search for places where the local rainfall, however meager, might be enough to sustain a small crop. The new settlements they build are shadows of their former homes. The houses are small, made of simple mud brick or wattle and daub. The streets are irregular. There are no great public works, no baths, no drains, and the sophisticated technologies of the urban era are simply left behind. They stop using the script, for there are no complex trade deals to record. They abandon the standardized weights, for there is no great market to regulate. It's like moving out to the country and deciding you no longer have a use for Wi-Fi, plumbing, or currency. It is a profound cultural simplification, born of necessity. This process was not a collapse in the sense that everyone died, the people survived. They adapted. But the civilization as a complex, urban, literate society did not. This is a central debate for those who study their end. Historians still argue whether this period should be defined as the collapse of the Indus civilization or as a transformation into a post-urban, rural society. Collapse sounds dramatic and final, while transformation emphasizes the continuity of the people and their traditions, albeit in a radically new form. It's a debate about whether the glass was shattered, or if it was simply melted down and reformed into 1,000 smaller, simpler cups. You stand in a street in Mohenjo-Daro that is now eerily quiet. The sounds of workshops and children's laughter are gone, replaced by the whisper of the wind through empty doorways. The houses stand like open tombs. The great machine has finally ground to a halt. The city is becoming what its name in the Sindhi language would one day mean, a mound of the dead. There is an old joke about the last person to leave a place being asked to turn out the lights. But here, there are no lights to turn out. There is only the slow, sad process of abandonment, the final, quiet shuffle of feet as the last family leaves their ancestral home, pulling the door closed on the greatest civilization of the Bronze Age. You walk through the main street of Mohenjo-Daro one last time, but now the silence is absolute. There are no fleeing families, no groaning ox carts. They are all long gone. The only sound is the wind, whistling through the empty doorways and picking at the corners of the brick buildings. Sand is beginning to pile up in the laneways, the slow, patient advance of the desert. The city is no longer dying. It is dead. And in this profound silence, you have time to reflect on the nature of its end. Our modern imagination is drawn to the drama of a sudden collapse. We picture Pompeii, frozen in an instant by a volcanic eruption. We think of the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, falling to the Spanish in a bloody, decisive siege. We expect a collapse to be an event, a final battle, a great fire, a single, cataclysmic moment that marks a clear end. But that is not what happened here. The end of the Indus civilization was not a bang. It was a slow fade, a gradual and protracted unraveling that stretched over hundreds of years. The timeline of the decline is staggering in its length. The first cracks in the system, the social decay and failing infrastructure, began to appear around 1900 BCE. The great abandonment of the major cities gathered pace over the next 2 centuries. By around 1300 BCE, even the smaller post-urban settlements that carried on the legacy were fading, replaced by new cultural patterns. The entire process of deurbanization and cultural transformation took something like 600 years. That is a collapse that lasted longer than the entire Roman Empire. It's a terrible plot for a disaster movie. The main character wouldn't be a hero trying to outrun a fireball. The main character would be long-term atmospheric moisture patterns, and the movie would be 6 centuries long. What you've witnessed was not a single cause, but a domino rally in agonizing slow motion. It was a cascade of failures, each one amplifying the next. The global climate shifted, weakening the life-giving monsoon. This crippled the river systems, killing the Sarasvati entirely. This led to chronic agricultural failure, which in turn caused malnutrition and famine. This social and economic stress drove people from the countryside into the cities, causing overcrowding and a breakdown of the civic order that had been the civilization's hallmark. This, combined with failing sanitation, created the perfect breeding ground for epidemic disease. And all of these factors together made the very concept of the large, centralized city, the crowning achievement of their culture, not just unsustainable, but a death trap. The response was not to fight a final, glorious battle. The response was to leave. This is the period archaeologists call the localization era. The great, unified, interconnected culture of the mature Harappan phase didn't just vanish. It broke apart. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, a mosaic of smaller, regional, rural cultures. The descendants of the city builders of Mohenjo-Daro became subsistence farmers in small, anonymous villages scattered across the subcontinent. It is the ancient world's version of everyone, simultaneously deciding to quit their corporate jobs in the city and move to the country to open an artisanal pottery studio. You can see this transformation in the archaeological record. At Harappa itself, in the layers of earth directly above the ruins of the great city, a new and different culture appears. Archaeologists call it the cemetery H culture. They had different styles of pottery, decorated with new motifs like peacocks and stars, and they practiced a different form of burial. They were clearly not the same as the Harappans of the city's prime, yet there are also threads of continuity. This is a snapshot of the localization process in action, a new regional identity emerging from the embers of the old, grand, unified civilization. So, did the Harappan people and their culture truly disappear? This is one of the most profound and unresolved questions. Historians still argue whether this deurbanization represents a complete cultural break, a dead end, or if essential elements of the Indus culture survived in these scattered rural communities. Did their language, their religious ideas, their craft traditions, and their stories live on, eventually blending with those of newcomer groups like the Indo-Aryans to become part of the foundational DNA of later Indian civilization? How many of the traditions we see in India today have their deepest, oldest roots right here, in the soil of these silent cities? You look out from the high mound of the citadel, over the endless expanse of brick ruins. The end was not a dramatic fall. It was a quiet, rational, and deeply sad dispersal. The people did not vanish. They walked away, but their world, their complex, literate, urban, and enigmatic world, did vanish. It dissolved back into the landscape, leaving behind these ghost cities as the only proof that it was ever here at all. The silence that surrounds you now is the true sound of its ending. You stand one last time on the high citadel of Mohenjo-Daro, the manufactured mountain at the heart of the dead city. From here, you can see the entire ruins spread out before you, a silent, three-dimensional map of a lost world. For this entire journey, you have been examining the individual pieces of the puzzle: a brick, a seal, a drain, a skeleton. But now, from this vantage point, you can finally see how they all fit together. You can see the full, breathtaking, and tragic picture of the collapse. There is no single culprit. There is no simple answer. The search for a lone villain, an invading army, a great flood, a devastating plague, is a fool's errand. The end of this civilization was not a single event, but a cascade of failures, a slow-motion chain reaction of cause and effect that played out over centuries. It was a systems collapse, and it all began with the sky. The prime mover, the first domino to fall, was the climate. The Indian summer monsoon, the great planetary engine that had reliably watered their world for 1,000 years, began to weaken and grow erratic. This was the external shock that the Harappans, for all their ingenuity, could not control. It was the changing of the world itself. This atmospheric betrayal led directly to a hydrological catastrophe. The great rivers, the twin pillars of their civilization, began to falter. The Indus, starved of its usual payload of rain and snowmelt, delivered weaker and more unpredictable floods, and the Sarasvati, already geologically wounded, was dealt a death blow. It dried up and vanished, taking the entire eastern heartland of the civilization with it. This environmental crisis then triggered a profound social crisis. The failure of the floods meant the failure of agriculture. The great surplus of grain that was the bedrock of their urban society disappeared, replaced by scarcity and the specter of famine. The drying of the Sarasvati basin created a massive internal refugee crisis, as hundreds of thousands of people were displaced, flooding into the remaining cities and putting them under unbearable strain. Under this immense pressure, their perfectly engineered urban system, the pride of their civilization, began to break down from within. The central authority, which had maintained the immaculate streets and drains, lost its grip. The cities became overcrowded, chaotic, and unsanitary. The complex, long-distance trade networks that brought in wealth and prestige goods withered and died. The social cohesion that had bound their society together dissolved in the face of hunger and desperation. And into this perfect storm of malnutrition and poor sanitation stepped the final horseman of their apocalypse: disease. Epidemics of cholera, tuberculosis or leprosy, or perhaps a novel pathogen from a distant land, would have swept through the weakened, crowded populations, turning the cities from sanctuaries into graveyards. And so, the final act, the great abandonment. The deurbanization was not the collapse itself. It was the logical and final response to it. The people, faced with a world of failing crops, dying cities, and rampant sickness, made a rational choice. They left. They abandoned the failed urban experiment and retreated to a simpler, more resilient rural way of life. They were not wiped out. They adapted. Even as their world fell apart, they were changing their survival strategies, shifting from the traditional Harappan winter crops of wheat and barley to more drought-resistant summer crops like millet, a clear sign of a people trying to make their peace with a new, harsher climate. This complex, interconnected cascade of failures is now the consensus view. The old simple theories have been replaced by a more nuanced, multi-causal understanding. But of course, the fine details are still debated. Historians still argue whether this collapse was a uniform process across the entire million-square-kilometer territory, or if it played out differently in different regions. Perhaps the end was swift and catastrophic in the Sarasvati Basin, a slow, grinding decay in the core Indus Valley, while the coastal ports in Gujarat, benefiting from different maritime climate patterns, may have even thrived for a time. Was it one monolithic collapse or a series of interconnected regional crises? You look out over the silent bricks. The answer to the great question: why did this advanced Bronze Age civilization with perfect city grids suddenly vanish? Is that they didn't vanish suddenly. They faded gradually. And they faded because everything went wrong at once. It was a Rube Goldberg machine of doom, where a change in the wind patterns over the ocean eventually led to a family in Mohenjo-Daro closing their door for the last time. It's the most frustratingly complex and yet deeply human answer imaginable. The final verdict on the collapse of the Indus Valley is that, well, it's complicated. And so, it is over. You are alone now, standing on the silent citadel, the sun warm on your face. The story of the collapse has been pieced together, a complex tapestry of climate, water, and human fragility. The investigation is complete. All that remains is the profound echoing silence of the place itself. Below you, the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro stretch out like the skeleton of a great leviathan, its brick bones bleached by 5,000 suns. The people are gone. Their voices are gone. Only the ghost of their magnificent failed idea remains. What is the legacy they left behind? The people, of course, did not vanish from the face of the earth. They survived. They walked away from the dying cities, scattered into 1,000 smaller streams and flowed back into the landscape. Their DNA is woven into the fabric of the hundreds of millions of people who live in Pakistan, India, and across South Asia today. Their genetic legacy is immense, but their cultural legacy is a ghost. They are the subcontinent's great ancestors, but they are ancestors who left no name and no stories. The grand civilization they built, however, truly did die. After the last residents departed, it would be more than 1,000 years before cities of this size, complexity, and order would be built again in India. The very concept of the master-planned, sanitary, brick-built metropolis was lost. The knowledge of their hydraulic engineering, their urban grid, their script, it all faded into the soil along with their cities. It was a staggering loss of cultural and technological knowledge, a great forgetting. And so we are left with the great haunting questions that have no answers. Who were they really? What did they call themselves, their cities, their great rivers? Who sat in the high seat of power, the serene priest-king, or a committee of faceless merchants? What did they truly believe? What was the meaning of the ever-present unicorn? And who was the horned lord of the beasts meditating amidst the tigers and elephants? And the ultimate question, the one that holds the key to all the others. What were they trying to tell us? The undeciphered script is their final, most poignant legacy. It is the ultimate symbol of their silence. They are a fully literate civilization that history is forced to treat as prehistoric, a people who wrote thousands of texts that we can only stare at like beautiful abstract art. They left us the key to their entire world, but we cannot find the lock. A minority of scholars have searched desperately for a link, for a thread of continuity between the Indus script and the much later Brahmi script, the mother of most modern Indian writing systems. But the gap of 1,000 years and the lack of any intermediate scripts make this a tantalizing but unproven dream. For now, the wall of silence remains absolute. The final question, the one that echoes loudest in these empty streets, is about their place in the grand story of human civilization. Historians still argue whether the Indus Valley civilization was the first chapter of India's long story, a direct foundational ancestor whose ideas and beliefs survived in some form to influence what came after, or if it was a magnificent false dawn, a brilliant but ultimately dead-end experiment whose achievements were forgotten and had to be reinvented wholesale a millennium later. Was this the seed of one of the world's great continuous cultures, or just its most spectacular prelude? You reach down and touch the surface of a brick in the wall of the Great Bath. It is rough, solid, and still warm from the sun. It was made by human hands 4,500 years ago. It has outlasted the people who made it, their language, their beliefs, and their entire world. This brick, in its simple, standardized, practical perfection, is perhaps their truest legacy. It doesn't answer any of your questions, it simply endures. A silent testament to the order they created, and to the silence that followed. And so, our long walk through the silent cities comes to a gentle close. The sun begins to dip towards the horizon, casting long, soft shadows that fill the empty streets and quiet courtyards of Mohenjo-Daro. The sharp, baked red of the bricks softens to a deep orange, and then to a dusky purple in the fading light. The heat of the day finally releases its grip, and a cool, soft breeze begins to whisper through the ruins, carrying with it the scent of dust and immense, ancient time. The sharp edges of the mystery begin to blur, the haunting questions fading into a quiet sense of wonder, a peaceful acceptance of a story that may never be fully told. The journey is over. You can let the images dissolve now, leaving the ghosts of this lost world to their eternal silent slumber. Let the deep quiet of that place settle into your own quiet room. The story is finished. There is only the soft hum of the fan now, and the stillness of the night.